talk with. Everybody understands that it's all my relations, or they're all related. You know, and some of those words I expressed, when you understand all that, those relationships, all my relations means all of that. You know, so I'm at a point where I can just go all my relations, and all of that is running through. You know, because I've taken the time over years to learn all that. What are those relationships? You know, and they're all related. You know, and some of those words I expressed, when you understand all that, those relationships. All my relations means all of that. You know, so I'm at a point where I can just go all my relations, and all of that is running through. You know, because I've taken the time over years to learn all that. What are those relationships? You know, and that's what it's about. As two-leggeds, a two-legged animal, all we do is bring change. See? We don't have warm fur. You know, we don't have sharp claws. We don't run very fast. We don't have sharp teeth. Well, we need a fire to keep us warm in the winter, or we're going to freeze to death. You know? So there's that whole dependency on the creation that sets us apart from the other animals, other birds, and we don't have those things. So everything we need comes from that creation like that. And if we're not careful, it can cause damage. So one of our instructions is that every morning we give that Thanksgiving. It doesn't matter how people do it, you know. Up this way we'll use tobacco. Down southwest, there's people down there, they use that corn pollen. They offer that as opposed to the tobacco. There's other area things where they do use tobacco. You know, but that's how they do it, but it's still that the Thanksgiving is still the same. The knowledge is the understanding, and the respects are the same. And there's a reason that we have to do that. That's one of our, what we say in original instructions. Because as the two-legged, we're the only ones who forget. See? What if the rivers decided that they're too lazy to run today? You know? Or sun decides, I'm too lazy, I don't want to get up this morning. I was up partying with the moon all night. You know? See, but they don't forget. Or if the mosquitoes decided they didn't want to pollinate the grasses. Everybody thinks that, well, mosquitoes are pests, you know, but they do something, see? Well, their instructions, they pollinate the grasses. See, everything like that. We're the only ones who forget our instructions, which is why we're supposed to do this daily reminder for ourselves in the morning, you know? If you want to do that, it's not that hard. You know, I was telling Stefan here today, everything I know, he should know. Everything I know, and I know how to do it, how to take care of it. I should have known when I was 16. At one time, that's how it was. You know, it doesn't make me anything special. You know, I carry these articles, I carry this pipe. But that doesn't make me special. It doesn't mean it's a privilege. Oh, I'm a pipe carrier. You know? No, that's a responsibility. See? That's not my pipe. I just carry it. This pipe belongs to you. It belongs to the people. That's my responsibility. See, so I have to make sure I remember that. I can't forget. I can't be too lazy, or you'll be like the sun forgetting to get up in the morning. You know? And that's that sacredness. Everything I need to know for my life really is in here. And that's how it is with our ceremonies, whether it's tobacco burning, or whether it's that sweat, whether it's this pipe. Everything you need to know is in there. You know, if you just look at it, you just learn how to open up that sense of the sacred. See? Every morning you give that Thanksgiving. I know every day things become clearer and clearer, believe it or not. You know, who I am, what's my place in this creation, what's my instructions. You know, how should I be walking myself? How do I conduct myself with my brothers, with my sisters? they're not up here, but I've seen other lodges where they'll have little paintings or posters of the 7 grandfathers. And those are the things that are important because it's a way of life. It's not just something that, you know, you only do on one day or, you know, you only do at the full moon. It's every day. See? I haven't sundanced for years now. You know, when I did, I sundanced for 8 years. I haven't danced in a long time, but I'm still in that arbor. Right? I'm still in that Sundance arbor. You know, one thing that was pointed out to me when I started sundancing is that we go in and we'll have the tobacco flags with the colors and the directions. We're going into that eastern door to begin the day's dance. The 4th day after we're done dancing, we're leaving the arbor. They've taken those flags away. We're entering through that flags, but there's no flags now when we're leaving that arbor. So I wondered about that. This old man told me, you're not leaving. There's no flags here, but you're not leaving. See? So you start to learn that what you're doing, that Sundance, that's your life. See, so I'm still in that. Okay, so that means how am I conducting myself? How am I reacting with my brothers, with my sisters? You know, because I'm still in that arbor. You know, we're changing things. We're making things sacred. We're understanding that sacredness. You know, to understand that, to help every breath is a gift of the creation. You know, that's the sense of the sacred. Every breath is a gift of the creation. You know, how hard were those trees working? How hard were those plants working? How many little microscopic animals in the waters died so I could take that breath? You think of the creation sacrifice for that. That's a gift. See? To start understanding that, you start developing that sense of the sacred. Okay? If we understood those things, then we would know better than to be clear-cut. Right? And things like that. Take what you need, you know, over, and that's what's happened. You know, everything, the creation's been reduced to a commodity, no longer being respected. So we have to recover that sense of the sacred. So you start with the small things. I started with understanding that tobacco and that tobacco burning, how important it was every morning. You know, it's not something I do, you know, every day. And it doesn't take long because now I understand what all those relationships are, that whole Thanksgiving address helped me to understand, you know, what's my relationship with the wind, what's my relationship with the moon, what's my relationship with the four-legged, with the winged. How do I maintain the validity of that relationship? And that becomes your life. See, you start walking with that sense of the sacred, with that knowledge. You start seeing what's going on. You know, what has to happen, what has to stop happening. You know, you start developing it. How can I make sure that my 7th generation is going to have clean water to drink? How can I make sure my 7th generation will have clean air? They're going to have a clean place to live. You know, and the ceremonies help bring all that into clarity. You know, it's not the be all and the end all because it's us. One of the things in the longhouse that we talk about is those old people tell the young ones this is the greatest gift the Creator gave us. You can do anything. But this is where it starts. See, this is where you have to start giving in that direction. You know, so you have to have what in the longhouse they talk about right thinking. Right? What they call the Iroquois Confederacy in the language, it's Yonsoniyongwe. Which doesn't mean great law of peace as it does, it means the people with right thinking. Because there were those dark times before that we had to come through. You know, so we come back Anishinaabe, what does that mean? You know, Anishinaabe, that's the people. But it's a little bit more than that when you start hearing that broke down. I heard somebody break that word down. It means the people, but it means the people with good hearts. See, so what was there prior to becoming the people with good hearts? Right? It means that we've already been through all of those dark times, and we start understanding that sense of the sacred. That's why we know you live in balance with the creation. It's not because we know that's the way to do things, because we've already been there, done that. How many generations ago? That's why there's prophecies and stories that talk about those previous worlds that we inhabited that were destroyed. We know how they were destroyed. It was because of technology. And that's why those stories about keeping balance and why these ceremonies and that, so that doesn't happen again. We just didn't know other peoples didn't quite reach that consciousness yet. So we're maybe in the process of redoing all that. But it has to start somewhere, right? Start with that sense of the sacred. What does that mean? It opens up a whole new thing, And sometimes it means going through a process, A lot of our peoples get angry, But it doesn't mean it's a bad thing, not to be afraid of it. It's that anger because all of a sudden realizing what's true, what we've been lied to about. When you can push through that anger, it doesn't lead to hatred, but it can lead to a whole new compassion for your peoples. A whole new understanding of what we have to do, what's going on. I don't hate anybody. Doesn't mean that I still don't get angry. But the anger is not of hatred. The anger is out of love. If I didn't love my people, I wouldn't be angry over what's been done. See? And that's what it's about. But how can I hate the German people or the white people or the English people or any people if we're all related? How can I hate myself? See? And that's what it is. Doesn't mean we don't know anger, but it's not quite the same thing, But people tend to put it together, But it's not something to be afraid of. It's something to push through. Because it's not the same as a hatred. I've already been there. I already hated myself. I worked through that. It's a good thing I'm not dead or in jail. The things I was doing when I was 15, 16 years old. I was robbing people. I was hurting people. I was fighting. I didn't like them. How could I like them? I didn't even like myself. I was lucky. I'd be dead or in jail. Little spiritual intervention started pulling me out of that. The spirit grabbed me by the throat and tell you what not to do. You should listen. Well, the thing is, they didn't tell me what to do. But I had elders started noticing and showing things like that. Started teaching me these things. Helped me push through that. That's why I do this system. This is why it's important. We have to remember that every day who we are, what's our place in this creation. How can we maintain that validity? They talk about, Longhouse chiefs, I've heard them say spirituality is the highest form of political consciousness. Well, that's why your spirituality is that's what you how to walk as a good human. In order to walk as a good human, you have to understand your relationship. How to maintain the validity of that relationship. What's my relationship with the waters, with the earth, with the corn, with the sky, with the four-legged, with the winged? How do I make sure that relationship continues? That's your political action, see? Spirituality is the highest form of political consciousness. Not the separation of church and state, although I understand what they were doing with that. But it's not the same thing. Church isn't the same as spirituality. Because I used to wonder about that, so I studied it. I started to realize in their histories what had been going on. And that more or less, at one point the churches were also the courts. And so I guess that's why in their doctrines they had to develop their separation of church and state. I guess it was getting too much for them. But it's not quite the same thing as spirituality. You start understanding that it helps you walk, helps you live, it helps you to be equal. One of the 7 grandfather teachings is important that one about humbleness, humility. Without that humbleness and humility, how can I greet someone as an equal? Without that, I'm either going to be looking up to them or I'm going to be looking down at them. But if I'm humble, I can greet them equally. It's also a protection for you. Humbleness helps keep you from making people jealous. So there's also that aspect of it. Sometimes people talk about bad medicine. Well, that's where the humbleness comes in. Because without that, jealousy and gossip are what they say in the longhouse at the beginnings of bad medicine. Well, if you're humble, then you don't have any of that out there. It's when you start getting too full of yourself, people start noticing and getting jealous and try to keep that humbleness. Elder told me one time, I'd be walking around and said, well, I'm proud to be Indian. Well, what did you do? What do you mean? You said you're proud to be Indian. What did you do? I don't understand. Well, you were born Indian. That's not an accomplishment. Wait a minute. Started shaking me up there. Wait a minute. But then I started understanding. I'm not proud to be Indian. I'm proud of my accomplishment. But being Indian is not an accomplishment. It doesn't mean that I don't have dignity. It doesn't mean I don't have pride, but it's not quite the same. I wouldn't have understood that without these things. The tobacco, without the pipe, without the sweats. Because they're all connected. They all help. So every morning, give that Thanksgiving, offer that. If you can't remember all the relations, don't worry about it. Just do what you can. And next time you go to ceremony or hear something else will come to you because you start to open that up. It took me a long time to learn all of that. And what I do is really short. You go to a ceremony in the longhouse, they give that morning Thanksgiving, you're there for an hour listening, I had other Indians up west tease us about, you longhouse people, went and they were praying for everything. They were praying for the little red bug and the little blue bug. And I think they do it in a good way. It's just fun teasing. It just makes me laugh because they know what it's about. But when you understand all of that, then it becomes easy just to see how our relations, because all of that is flowing through your mind, through your head. People are interested. I'm on Facebook. You can look at it on there. Because I do sometimes. I used to post every morning. I just do a little sunrise greeting after I burn my tobacco and everything. I don't do that so much anymore. I started noticing some people were depending on me to do that. My intent was to encourage them to be doing it. So I kind of slowed down a little bit. I still post once in a while. But on my other page, I put out as just Jay says, I've got a whole Thanksgiving greeting that I've done once that I put up there to help people with that. I'm not trying to be a preacher or nothing, just trying to help share what I know. Because like I said, what I know is you all should know as it is. It's nothing mysterious, it's nothing secret, it's nothing mystical. It's just, it's a naturalness when you understand how the creation works. Water is the same thing. Waters are really important. I've known medicine people that they can use just water and they can cure people. But they have that knowledge and that gift to be able to do that. scientists are starting to finally understand how that is. You get up in the morning, you just give a thanksgiving with that water. Do a thanksgiving prayer with that water. And they say, what you do is you're making that water medicine. I remember some sisters telling me when they were small girls that growing up with their grandmas, that their grandmas would send them out every morning to bring back 4 pails of water. And once they got in the habit of doing that, then they started getting them to pray with that water. And then slowly started telling them that when you have a family of your own, it'll be your responsibility. You're making that water into medicine for your family. And scientists now see that. They see what happens when someone prays over water. All of a sudden those water molecules start turning into these really beautiful crystal, snowflake looking shapes. Somebody will go in and they start yelling and swearing, being aggressive near that water molecule changes to an unrecognizable, shapeless blob. We're mostly water. So if I'm going around the house and I'm yelling, I'm hollering at my kids, and what am I doing to their water? You see? You start learning these, you start understanding how that sense of the sacred works. We're mostly water, so what are we doing to ourselves? Considering I grew up with, what do my water molecules look like? How can I get them to look like nice, pretty snowflakes? And that shows how we're all connected. We're mostly water. And that water is constantly recycling, flowing around the earth, see? So then you come back to, wow, let's talk what I say. We are all related. We're all sharing that water. And that water has a memory. Scientists are starting only to learn and understand that just like the DNA, water also has a memory. Water also carries sound. And just understanding those little things, and then you start looking back, well, what were those old people talking about in that longhouse? Or what were they talking about in that lodge? What were they talking about around that fire? And all of a sudden it starts making sense. This is what they meant. We were sitting one time just looking at a couple old Anishinaabe guys. One of the old guys just started laughing. Wondered what he's laughing about. He says, oh, he says, I just feel good. He says, look at all those spirits dancing on the whole water. And then he started explaining some of this stuff about water, and I started seeing what he was talking about. It's all in there. Somewhere, where was that water maybe 100 years ago? Maybe that water was in Japan. Maybe from there it went to Africa. Back across the Atlantic, on its way into that river. And we're sharing that water, we're all connected in one way or another, because that water has a memory. They're starting to see and understand that. Even the birds. You have a lake over here, you don't have loons. And if you really know what's going on, you listen to the song they're singing. Go to another lake and you're going to notice the loons sound the same, but there's a little bit of difference in their song. Take those loons from that lake over to this lake, and their song is going to change to what these loons are singing. And see, each body of water even has its own sound. Years ago, it was back in the 80s. Andy had come with me when I went down there to Arizona. And one of the old Hopi guy, David Malongi, he's dead now, grandfather David. At that time, he was over 100 years old. He was talking about that. He said, what's been happening? He said, the waters are going to start bringing about that purification. It's because of what they've been doing to the waters. They're confusing the spirits of the water. And they're starting to react to that. They're trying to replenish themselves and renew themselves. So you look what's going on with the weather patterns now. Those waters, just like David see that how many waters are trying to rebalance themselves out. You know, it started beaver trade, believe it or not. That's the waters. They're very important. They started removing all the beavers within 100 years of the French and English arrival into the beaver population. What were those beavers doing? You know, we talk about beaver clan, they say, well, beaver clan, they're the community builders. You think about the creation, that's what beaver does. Beaver's creating communities. He's holding back the waters. He's providing places for birds. He's guiding and ensuring the water flows of the rivers and everything. And what was important about that was, for us, it was those waterways that marked our clan and our nation territories. They started decimating the beavers. They started changing the courses in rivers. That started bringing about the conflict. At their arrival, there was a peace that existed. There had been a peace from Lake of the Woods to the Tennessee River, from the Atlantic to the Mississippi. That all came under the concept of the one soup bowl wall. You know, and that had been as a result of the Great Law of Peace coming in and starting to spread the concept of the only thing you have to do is give up the right to wage war. And that brought about that. So when the Europeans first arrived, there was that whole area, there was a period of peace. And within 100 years, that started being broken up by that beaver trade. See? Because it started creating unnecessary conflicts that we had resolved after. And you think what that means, a period of 400 to 600 years in an area that size of peace. No other place in the world there's a peace like that. And it didn't take long for that to get broken up with the beaver trade. How do we go back and start undoing that? And start making that peace again? And then how do we bring the settlers into that so they understand what's necessary to preserve the validity of our relationship with this Turtle Island and with the creation? You know, so we have to start somewhere. I started with this. You know? And when I put this away, that's what led me to that. Right? I put this away, I managed to get away from that. You know. So by the time I was 19, I'd gotten away from that. But I was still a witness. I put that away though when my first son was born. Because I knew I wanted to change things. I didn't like what I saw. But I didn't know how to change things. What's going to work that I can change things? I didn't know. But I knew what wasn't working. And this wasn't working. You go in our community, and how does every single hard luck story start? You know, oh, I was at a party and I got in a fight and I ended up in jail, or I got drunk and I got stopped by the police and I ended up in jail, or I got drunk and I got in a fight with my girlfriend, got drunk and I got in a fight with my boyfriend. So I knew what wasn't working. I put that away, and that's when the elders started opening this up to me. And it's not that we condemn people, we just condemn that alcohol abuse. You know, because we know how it was used at one time. It wasn't medicine at one time. It became really easy to abuse it. And that's the consciousness that we saw and we bring on to. You know, so my thing is that, well, I'm trying to just get rid of it. You know, so I got rid of that from my life. Never look back. I'm not perfect. I mean, there's the odd time I've still got in hand, but not to the point that I used to. You know, it quit being a lifestyle. You know, I went out when I turned 50 and I partied a little bit because I figured I've now surpassed the average lifespan of a North American Indian male. It's no longer a statistic. So I went out with a few friends. Every few years I've done something like that, but it's never been a lifestyle. For all intents and purposes, I've quit that. You know, that's where we have to start looking. What's that sense of the sacred? How do we recover that? You know, and I'm running out of. I think that spirit's run out. I want to see if anybody has intimacy. So I introduced my son. Maybe we'll start with you.
Now at this time I want to just take a couple of minutes, ask my son if he wants to sing. Sorry. He's good. That's all right. Well, me too, I'm a half-breed. I'm half Anishinaabe, half Mohawk. My dad was Jim Mason. My dad was born in Toronto in the early 1920s. And what we've come to find out about his history, my dad's history goes back to the original treaty signers of that Toronto area. So that started making me understand why he stayed in that area. You know, why he was there. People didn't realize he was the chief of Toronto. You know? He would always be on his bench talking with people and giving advice, and he did a lot of work in the prisons. And, you know, working with the young men, and just that's what a chief does. You know, doesn't tell people what to do, doesn't boss around. The chief's job was just to make sure everything was, you know, didn't mean that you're the boss. Nobody wanted to be chief because it meant that you got all the work. You know, that's why Dad never talked about that, but he just did the work, you know. So I started to understand a little bit about that. Then on Mom's side, we come from Joseph Grant's family. That's on the Mohawk side. So I'm a half-breed, so I understand that. Don't seem dichotomous, you know. But to me, it just means that, you know, I represent that united front, you know. Because it goes like that all around, especially this part of the country for our peoples. You stop and consider what was going on around the time of, you know, Pontiac and Little Turtle and Tecumseh and Black Hawk and Chief Logan the Mohawk and, you know, all these kinds of things. It was constant movement around, you know. You go to Six Nations, and one of the names you find on Six Nations Reserve amongst the Cayugas, the last name is Nanticoke. Well, the reason that last name is there, the Nanticokes were one of the Lenape peoples. There was a time in their histories where those peoples had to flee from English aggression and scalp hunters and were taken in and adopted. But that last name was kept just as a reminder of what their roots were. You know, down in Cattaraugus, they still hold Delaware ceremonies, Lenni Lenape ceremonies. Because when those Lenni Lenape peoples were going through, they left some of that stuff there. And they're still holding those ceremonies, waiting for the Lenni Lenape to come back with them. You know, those are the kinds of movements that we're going around. So we're all interconnected in some way or another, you know. One of the things Art Solomon taught me, one of the first things is never refuse knowledge. You know, if it's an Indian way, you know, in this land, never refuse knowledge. You know, because I know that, you know, what he's talking about. I know that these things have been going around. I met a Medewan man in Minnesota. He's old, an Anishinaabe man. And this was in 1990 when OCA was going on. And I was down at the American Indian Movement Conference trying to talk to them about, you know, what kind of support can be helped and can be lent, you know. And so I was cutting across the powwow grounds, and this old man was sitting off on the side. All of a sudden he yelled at me. I turned around, he looked at me. He just gave me a big grin. He said, "Come here." So I went over and he says, "Joe," he says, "I was watching you walk across and you reminded me of a story." And so he started telling me a story about Bear Clan and how bears. He says, most people think, you know, he says that they're solitary. He said, but bear has his territory. You know, female bear, she has her territory too. And she's raising her family. You know where her territory is? I said, no. It's inside that male bear's territory. A lot of people don't realize, you know, bear is a warrior, that's what he's doing. He's keeping everything away from that family in the middle. He says, I don't know why. He says, you reminded me of that story. I said, oh, well, I'm Bear Clan. Where he started laughing. He says, oh, good. He said, that must be why. He says, you know, he says, our people's, he says, a lot of our stories and ceremonies came from your things. And, you know, realize what he's talking about, because if you listen, we share the same creation story. Sky woman and landing on the turtle. You know, that's a Haudenosaunee story. It's also an Anishinaabe story. But we're different peoples. How come we share that? See? We also share that tobacco and the knowledge of that tobacco. It's just in different ways. You know, but we still burn that tobacco. I first started talking how to do that. And talking about the Thanksgiving, then in the long house, that's not the same thing. It was taught the same thing. The only difference was how that circle was. But everything else was the same, it was similar. I started understanding why that longhouse goes that way too. You know, we have a migration story. Migration story starts with us on the other side of the great river where the grass grew tall and there were buffalo. Our neighbors were the Wolf Nation. The Wolf Nation are the Pawnees. The great river is the Mississippi, so where were we? It's like around Oklahoma, lower Kansas, down through in that part. We started going east and then coming north. So going east and then coming, oh, well, that's where we pick up that alligator dance. You know, why is there an alligator dance in the longhouse in the northeast? We don't have any alligators up here. You know, but we have that. See, that's representative of, and all our peoples were doing that. You know, there's old Anishinaabe stories that talk about when winter declared war on summer. And winter was so fierce that he drove the people before him and they had to flee into the land of the summer. Until summer was finally able to rally and start pushing winter back to his homelands and the peoples were able to start returning again. What is that story talking about? And it says that happened more than once. What is that story? That's the Ice Ages. How long have our peoples been here and moving across, you know? You start understanding that stuff, you start realizing why there's a place in Mexico called Chihuahua. You know what Chihuahua means? That's Anishinaabe for big goose. It is. Why is there a name like that in Mexico? Believe it or not, that's one of the areas where the geese migrate to when they go down there. So you got to figure at one time there was probably an Anishinaabe hunter wanted to know where those goose went. You know, that's how far, you know, there's Kickapoo people in Mexico. Kickapoo people are an Anishinaabe people. You see? We're all related. We've been moving all across and, you know. So there's different ceremonies from different areas. But that's about the extent of it, because somewhere down the line we shared that with someone somewhere. You know? Somewhere down the road, our great-great-great-great-great-grandparents sat around the same campfire at one time. You know? So I never refuse knowledge. I mean, yeah, there's our own ways that are particular to the longhouse, and they come from that area. But that doesn't mean that you know, I don't have to respect what's going on here. You know, I'm Mohawk Anishinaabe, but I sundanced. The reason I sundanced was because I was asked. And out of respect, honoring that request, I said, yeah. You know, and then my pipe came from one of my Mohawk brothers. And what he advised me, he said, well, that's okay. He says, you know, that's not our way. He said, but if you do that, that's okay. It's just going to help you be more of what you are. It's not going to change you. It's just going to help. It's just going to add. And then he's the one that I got my pipe through. Because when I started dancing, that was one of the things I said, we need that pipe. It was up to me how, you know, to get that. So I got that through my Mohawk brother. And then his advice advised me too was, he said, remember, he says, that pipe is, that's a good thing. That can help people. He said, but remember, you're Mohawk. He said, that pipe is no good without this, meaning tobacco. He said, and this is ours. So, I was getting a blessing. It's okay, but don't forget who you are. So for me, it's okay to understand and accept knowledge, because it doesn't change who or what you are. But it can add to what you are. And for me, the dichotomy is being half and half. On mom's side, it's Mohawk, so that's matriarchy. I honor that, but I don't forget who my father's to. I can't have to honor him because of the respect I had. That's why I carry these instruments. Everything I got was either given to me or, I earned in one way or another. I have different feathers. Some feathers I earned in ceremony, some are true feathers. I feel sometimes really self-conscious. I'm not an elder. I've never thought of myself in those terms. I've been doing this since I was a kid, though. I started burning tobacco in California for people because I couldn't travel to the occupations all the brothers were going to because I had a big cast on my leg. So I asked Uncle Bill, if we had a huge house. It was Native American Community School, later AIM for Freedom Survival Group. There was a bunch of us. That's where we stayed. We lived, we worked, studied together. I asked Uncle Bill if I could make a fire in the back. He said, why? I said, well, I can't go off to the fishing wars with everybody because of my leg. I said, but I can burn tobacco. So he said, okay. So I did that. He come out, he said, can you do that again tomorrow? I said, yeah. So Uncle Bill is there with me burning tobacco. He asked me again, can you do that tomorrow? I said, yeah. Then he went, he had everybody in the house up and we're all out there burning tobacco. Every day. A couple of months later, we've got people coming from all over the Bay Area Indian communities to burn tobacco in that backyard in the middle of the Oakland ghetto. Sunrise ceremony. And not only that, but there's people coming from Alaska to Guatemala through our house and sitting and doing ceremonies with it and taking that knowledge with them and spreading it out. That's how long I've been resisting that term of elder, because I don't see myself that way. I'm just a man. I'm just a warrior. And it doesn't mean by saying I'm a warrior, it doesn't mean that I'm going out and trying to pick fights. Because in the language, Rodas Kanagate, that's who we are. And that means the ones who carry the burden. In Mohawk, that's who we are. Right? So if the people are hungry, you feed them. People are cold, you shelter them. People are crying, you comfort them. People are in danger, you protect them. It doesn't mean you're going on and you're trying to pick fights. It's different. You're protecting. You're not bringing the danger to them. I talked to some of the men at a demonstration we had in Toronto. As we're marching and we're rallying and drawing attention to the fact that we've got over 800 missing sisters up there, and nothing's being done about it. And so while we're doing that, some of the young men are confronting the police. I had to stop them from doing it. No, we're not afraid of the police, but that's not why we're here. You see those drums, you see those feathers, you see those women. We're not supposed to be going and bringing trouble to them. And that's what you're doing. We're supposed to be there if the trouble comes. That's when we're, you see, but you don't go out there and confront them and antagonize and bring those. We're supposed to protect that stuff, you see. So start changing that around a little bit, because too many of our young people are running around acting all. I mean, I understand it. I did that myself until I was redirected. Started understanding. I I was a real bonehead when I was a kid. But that's why I try and do these things. Don't forget back, bring back that sense of the sacred. Start understanding that, things start getting clearer. So I'm going to wind down, unless anybody has any questions. I'll talk about different stuff tomorrow.
I hope.
Maybe we put it in that fire. Maybe we put it in, you know, but the thing is that it's that smoke. See? It's the way that's burnt. That's when you're offering it to the creation. That's when you're giving your thanksgiving. You use that smoke. It carries that all up, reminds the creation that you remember. You know? So that's how different these medicines are used. Your sage, your cedar, your sweetgrass, your tobacco. There's other things that are used in different parts of the country too, you know. I said the Southwest, they use corn pollen. It's one of their sacred things. Most of the Pueblo, the Hopis, the Dene, they use that. They use corn pollen. Another smudge I've used comes from down south is cloth. It's a resin from a tree, like a pinon tree, juniper tree. We call it copal. When you burn that, it smells really nice. But they use that in the same way how we'll use sage. It has that spiritual connection. It'll help you understand a little bit when you're at home and you're offering your thanks. You know what you're doing with your smudges, with your medicines, how you can use them. I know some people advise always carry tobacco tied, so you always have tobacco to pray with. Well, that's a nice idea. I say just tobacco, you know. I always have my tobacco I can offer, you know. Maybe something's going to happen. I have to pick a plant, or, you know, somebody gets wounded, or, you know, gets a fever, or, you know, I got to do something. Well, before I do that, I need that tobacco so I can make that offering. If you do that, it's respect. You know, you have to respect those other life forms. And that's what those tobaccos are for. So we look at all those things, how we can do them, how we respect them. You know, one of the other articles in there, in the middle, you see there's that fire. You know, we'll put that water in there. I like that, just to remind people, to show. One of the things we always did when there was council was that fire. Right? Because that fire has that power, it helps keep things at bay that you don't want around. In the Longhouse, they talk about that you don't have your council meetings after dark. You know, any council meetings and decision making was always done during the day. Because they say at the nighttime, that's the other part time, you know, that's the spirit. So you're still meeting and talking after dark, there's a chance maybe some of them are going to be inviting and they're going to be interfering with how you're talking about things there, you know, because they can be tricksters sometimes. So it was always during the day before the sun went down, the meeting was closed. And just like you have a Thanksgiving opening address, there's a closing address too when you're closing things. Day. Then that's when you go into your social dances into that time. But even in the Longhouse, in that way, even the social dances are ceremony. That's what I mean by yesterday, talking about that sense of the sacred. You think everything we do, even our breathing, is a ceremony. You think of everything that the creation did to allow you to take that breath, that's a ceremony. You know, that's that sense of the sacred. That's why I'm still in that Sundance Arbor. Even though I haven't danced for years, that means I still have to walk in that. See? In a sacred way we are walking, in a sacred way we are preparing, in a sacred way we are singing. You know? Because look, a nation is coming. And that's what it all gears towards, is that seventh generation. That's why we do that. Because look, a nation is coming. remember that that's what it's about. It's not about how much I can have, or how well, or what kind of a nice lifestyle I can have. It's about what am I going to leave for my great-great-great-great-grandchildren. There's an importance to that, that continuance, because we're only the change. That's all we are. We don't really contribute anything. If all the humans disappeared from the face of the earth tomorrow, the rest of creation would just continue, wouldn't even miss us. Think about that. We wouldn't even be missed. And yet we put ourselves on such an important pedestal in terms of the hierarchy of creation and development. If we all disappeared, we wouldn't even be missed. That's how pitiful we are, So we have to remember to give that thanksgiving, how we walk, how we conduct ourselves, even how we treat each other, Talking a little bit earlier, I remember one thing I always liked, I read about Sitting Bull, because we have to decolonize. And part of that decolonization is how do we deal with the trauma left over from the boarding school abuse. It's not enough just to talk about it and that, but it has to be done. But the thing is to remember not to allow it to become bitter. I've got no time to be bitter just to make things better, right? Even though we have to talk about it, we can still not allow that to make us bitter. It's just talking it through to understand things. I read about one time, the only time that Sitting Bull ever spoke, during when he was touring with Buffalo Bill's Wild West show. He used to like going out into cities and visiting all the little orphan kids or kids running around. He let kids eat buying candy or breads and sweet breads and that with the pay he was getting from Buffalo Bill's show, because they made him feel good, they made him laugh. He went back, and one day after doing that, he asked Buffalo Bill if he could speak. They'd always asked him to say something, and he never would. But this one time he agreed. He told Buffalo Bill he wanted to talk. So he came out and he gave this long talk to the audience over there about how important children are to the Indian people, to the Lakota people, what they mean, how special, how they're raised, how they're treated, how they're cared for. And he said, today I saw a terrible thing. He said, today I saw a woman actually strike her own child. He had tears in his eyes. That's who we are as Anishinaabe say. That's who we are as Ume. He was a warrior, hunter, buffalo killer, slayer of his enemies. But to see someone strike a child, to him that's inhuman. So you go from there to the boarding schools, and you see what was done to us as children. See, that's where that trauma comes from, and we have to, because that wasn't who we are. See, that's not who we are. In our cultures, there was no such thing as child abuse. There was no such thing as domestic abuse. There was no such thing as sexual abuse. And somewhere those learned behaviors started creeping in. See? So that's the most important part of what we talk about, that decolonization work. How do we start liberating? How do we start emancipating that consciousness so we remember how to treat each other? Because it's been hard. I had a hard time learning that because I grew up being knocked around, and I heard the same things. Well, if it was good enough for me, it was good enough for you. When I started having my first family, my first son was born, I analyzed all. I said, no. It stops here. Somehow we have to come to that collectively, We have to all start looking at understanding, bring back that humanness. I talked yesterday what those words mean, Que non sono the only, that's the people with the good minds. Right? The Anishinaabe, the people with the good hearts. See, that's what we have to recover. That's what everything else is extraneous to me as far as I'm concerned. You know, but all these things are necessary to bring back the humans. Okay? So these are meaningless until you start understanding. You know? The only reason, the only things that I use ritual for is just to help me to focus my thoughts. Everything else is really simple. Fire, tobacco, Thanksgiving. And the ritual I put into preparing all of that is just to help me focus what I'm doing. Help me to draw myself into that act at that time. You know? That's the only real ritual I do is when I'm filling this pipe for that reason, because it just helps me to focus on what it is I'm using that pipe for. Maybe sometimes it's because people have asked me to smoke for them, help them pray with them. So just to help me focus. And that fire represents all of that, that's bringing us together. And then our next stage there, and there was, next to it in there was we have the water. That water was the first medicine. Before we had anything else, we had that water. That's the first medicine. Our chief fire ranger told me one morning after the tobacco burning, he said, I would like this. He said, but you know, he said, sometimes you might find yourself without tobacco. He said, if that happens, he said, you can use water. You offer a little of that water, you know, to the earth. You'll do almost the same. That was the first medicine. You know, that's why the sweat lodge works the way it does. First things that were here were the water, the fire, rock and steam. Before there was anything else here. Water, fire, rock, steam. So you go in that sweat lodge, what's in there? See, you're going back to the beginning. You know, so you get a chance to sweat here, you do those sweats, you know. Just thinking about where you are, that helps you. Before, that was the beginning, just the water, the fire, rock, and steam, and the horizon. See? And that's that shape of that sweat lodge. Horizon to horizon. And within there's the fire, the water, the rock, the steam. You say that steam is the breath of the Creator. You know, we did a long talk about water yesterday. A lot of things, but one of the things yesterday was there were ceremonies going across all around for the waters. So I guess that spirit was moving us with those waters. And today we're being cleansed with the waters. So there's a lot of auspicious things happening right now. You know, you get up in the morning, first thing, you know, you have your water. And it's real easy to lift that water up towards that sun and say, thank you for this water. Just a simple blessing. You change that water into medicine. I've known medicine people who do doctoring just with water. You know, but there's whole ceremony involved, whole ceremony, and they end up by then they've turned that water into the medicine food. And then they doctor people with that water that they've turned into medicine. Our peoples have always said that. That's the first medicine. You know, and that's usually the grandma or mom's responsibility. You know, and she prays for that water in the morning, but she's doing that for the family. She's turning that water into medicine. See, you know, so there are things we've always known, and now scientists are starting to understand that. It doesn't matter if it's a rabbi or a Buddhist or an imam or a priest. They've done experiments where they have someone come in and say a prayer over that water. And then look at how that water molecule is, and it turns into this really nice crystal snowflake-like a shape, you know.
as opposed to somebody coming in and just yelling around and swearing in front of that water, and that water molecule changes to an unrecognizable blob. You see? So their science is now showing what we know. We can turn that water into medicine. That's the first medicine. So those things are there as those reminders. Right? And they say as men we're fire. But we also have water. And then they talk about how the women are water, but they also have fire. You know, but it shows that balance between those two. Right? So if you understand those energies, what starts going on when you throw alcohol into the mix? Right? If I was to take a bottle of alcohol and throw it on that fire, what's going to happen? And I'm taking that alcohol and I'm putting that on my fire, you see? And then surprised when I start raging out of control. It can rage out of control so much it can evaporate that water. It can work the other way too, where that fire can start steaming that water up and everything and start making that go out of control and put out that fire over here. You know? And then we wonder why there's so much problems in family relationships when you throw alcohol in there. You know, you keep throwing in fires and everything under control. So things to help you understand maybe how we can start walking in a better way, start walking in a good way. You know, because I mean, alcohol is a medicine, can be used that way, but that's, you start using it to flare out of control. That's not a good thing. You know? And so everything that we need to know and understand about that is in here. It's in here, or it's in that lodge, or it's in that house. And there's not very many things in here. It's really simple. You know? It's just walking a good way, understanding things, you know, getting back to what's basic. And that's the basics right there. You know, it's that tobacco. That's what was given basic to us. The tobacco, the fire, the water. How we relate to all of that, how we use those things, how we understand that, how they can keep us in balance. Because I know that tobacco has a way of communicating. There's a reason that we use it for that. When I go out, I pick medicine. I have to use that tobacco, only then it isn't burnt. The tobacco is burnt in the morning. I have to give that tobacco. That tobacco helps me to communicate. Because I'm talking to that medicine. I'm telling that medicine what I'm doing, why we need their help. There's a reason for that. They say that, you know, we don't understand anymore, but the plants, animals, that they still understand us. Just we've lost the ability to understand them. So what's going to happen? I'm doing that. That plant is going to communicate to its relatives. And then they'll help us in that way. Otherwise, if they talk about if you don't do that, then that energy in that plant isn't going to work the way you want it to. You know, just like when you're praying with that water and how that water can shift its molecules, that we're doing the same thing with those medicines that we pick. We're doing the same things when we're growing that food. You know, you can affect how those molecules are looking. They know that now. And those are things that we know and understand. You know, even when down to raising your kids, how are you going to do that? You know, I try and do my best not to yell around or holler, you know, berate or, you know, I'm watchful how I'm affecting that water. You know, I don't want that water to be in misshapen blobs. You know? And I think I'm right when I look at what this guy's doing. You know, how do you? That's some of the thoughts that were running through my head today. I was moving around and looking at the rain and thinking about things, you know, how important this stuff is and where it led to. You know, because we were very practical people. We're also a very intelligent people. Just that our intelligence went in a different direction than other people's intelligences. You know, our intelligence went more to social order and human dynamics, which is why we didn't see the kinds of things over here that were happening in Europe. We weren't selling our kids to factories. We weren't treating our sisters as chattels. We weren't treating ourselves as just wage slaves or labor, you know. We didn't have that concept. To us, that was inhuman, right? There was a whole continent over here with total unemployment. Nobody had a job, but that meant nobody had an employer. Nobody was a boss. There were no taxes. There were no courts. There were no police. There were no prisons. There were no human garbage dumps like old age homes and orphanages. There were no orphans. And they thought they could improve on that. You know? I always figured they should have came over and they should have adapted more to what they were finding over here. Right? Instead of just taking what they viewed as commodities. Right? Because I remember growing up and I didn't know nothing. The only thing I knew growing up, which is why I grew up not liking myself very much, you know, and I became the mean guy I was in my teens. You know, what was I taught? I was taught that we were savages. We didn't know how to farm. You know, we were backward. We were pagan. We were, you know, and I didn't know what the truth was. I was growing up in the city. You know. And even if I was growing up someplace else, everybody was coming out of the boarding schools and wouldn't or was afraid to talk about those things anyway. You know, so I had to start learning on my own, starting to understand. You know, they were always telling me I had to assimilate. I had to become more sophisticated. I had to become civilized. I had to quit acting like such a little savage. You know, quit behaving like a pagan. And then I had a teacher in grade 5 who used to punish me by making me write out pages of the dictionary. But I got to pick the pages, so I decided, well, okay, I'm going to write, let's see what civilization, what's sophisticated, you know. They're always telling me these things. I come to realize civilization simply defined as the art of building cities. It has nothing to do with moral, intellectual, or spiritual evolutionary development. It simply means the art of building cities. Okay, well, what is that city? That's an artificial man-made environment. That's forced to subjugate the natural world and people around it to maintain its growth and stability. Okay, I get it. So standing in the way are the people of the woods, the savage, the people of the earth, the pagans, you know, and sometimes the people of the heath, the heathens. So that I started understanding how these words started having those negative connotations attached to them, where at one time it was simply they were the people of the earth, because we were the ones standing in the way of that civilization, which didn't have anything to do with morality or spirituality, or, you know, it was simply creating an artificial environment. So I started looking and understanding these things. Okay, well, I am a savage. I'm a born-again savage, damn it. No? I'm a born-again pagan, you know. But, well, no, I'm not a heathen, because that was those people over there in the northern British Isles that beat Romans over the heads with big sticks and painted bodies blue, and, you know. So they were the heathens. No, I'm not a barbarian. That's the bearded ones, you know. Well, maybe a little bit now. You know, so I started understanding the meaning of these words, you know. And that, well, maybe I can get by just with being sophisticated, you know. Sophisticate, to alter or change from a natural pure state or form to another. Well, wait a minute, I happen to like my natural self. And again, I started to realize that it doesn't mean altering or changing to something necessarily better, just simply changing from its natural form to another. So that's what they mean when they're telling me I have to become sophisticated, right? So studying that language at an early age like that, that started me on a path to decolonization towards emancipating consciousness. I was able to start viewing the world and understand what people were saying around me, you know, what they were alluding to. The teachers really started to dislike me because I was able to stand up and tell them that wasn't what you said. These are the words you use. These are the definitions of those words. So this is what you actually said, and they didn't like me doing that stuff. You know, and that's when I started realizing, you know, well, okay, well, understanding their language is important. You know, so we have to do that. We have to look at that because it helps that liberation, helps how we think about things. You know, because there's a lot of things that go against our brain that we have to figure out. You know. And I didn't understand why it felt off that way, you know, till I was able to finally come out of things at another level and start meeting elders that had some patience with me. They had a lot of patience because I was a real bonehead then. I learned slowly. You know, but the thing that kept me going was that resistance consciousness. And that was another thing that I looked at, you know. Because I remember in school, I used to be purposely late on school most of the time because I hated the bells. You know, get to the schoolyard, you're playing around and having fun, and then they ring a bell and you got to stop and freeze and be quiet. And when everybody's like that and they're satisfied, they ring another bell and then you get to line up in front of the doors of the school. And when they're satisfied with the way you're behaving, they ring another bell and you get to walk into school and line up in front of the classroom. Ring another bell and you get to go in the classroom, you know. And so then this goes on at recess, and it goes on at lunch, and it goes on at afternoon recess, and there's a couple more bells before you're dismissed, and I hated them bells. And I started realizing, well, why do I hate those bells? And it was after I managed to get away from all of this street negativity, I started really educating myself. You know, I was only around 18, 19, but I was hanging out with all these university students. And, you know, guys involved in draft resistance and really socially conscious movers and thinkers. You know, I'd listened to all the things they were talking about. One of the things I learned about was Pavlov's dogs. I said, well, what's Pavlov's dog? So somebody started explaining to me who Pavlov does when the experiments he done with the dogs and ringing of the bells to make them salivate. And I started reading, that's why I hated those bells. That's when I began to understand that my resistance was natural to an attempt to modify my natural self. So resistance is natural. You know, it's a natural thing to happen. You know, it doesn't have to be a negative thing. It's just that we're so disempowered that sometimes it expresses itself negatively. You know, but the resistance itself it's a natural thing to do. It's natural for your mind, your spirit to resist it, to modify it from what it knows is proper and correct. And that went a long way towards emancipating my consciousness and towards that decolonization process. You know, just understanding the dichotomy of what our culture was and what they were attempting to shift us to. Right? So really helps to start seeing the beauty in our peoples, to start loving those things, you know, to start understanding what was real. Right? What was important to us was the corn, you know. What was important to us was the berries. What was important to us was the water. What was important was making sure that the relationship with those things continued in a good way. We knew better than the shit in the well, right? We knew better than to cut down all the trees. You know, we knew better than to rip up and poison all of the earth. You know, it wasn't that we couldn't think of those things. It wasn't that we didn't have the intelligence. It was that our intelligence worked towards a different direction. We're just as equally as intelligent. We just think about different things, you know, and in a different way. sometimes I figure maybe that's why they came over here. They're still trying to learn that stuff from us. You know, it just seems to be taking a long time and taking its toll on the creation in the process. My dad was telling me one time we were drinking a water. Some people came by on their way to the Native Center. My dad, he was a well-respected elder back then, but he was always outside on the bench, accessible for people to talk to. Someone come by and give us a couple of bottles of water. My dad was really looking hard at that water. I said, is something wrong with that? He said, no. He said, I was just remembering. He says, you know, when I was a kid, if someone would have told us we would have to buy this in plastic bottles, we would have told them they were nuts. You know, and that's what we should be concerned with, you know. People are looking, I look at the news all the time, they're always complaining about the price of gasoline going up and up. And while they're doing that, that's an illusion that's being to keep you from what's going on, you know. Keep you worried about how much that gas is going to cost you. Meanwhile, that liter of water is costing more than that liter of gas. And people ain't paying no attention to that. Well, at one time, you could just, you know, drink some water. All of a sudden, now it's costing more than gasoline. People ain't paying no attention to that, you know. So we have to start shifting our minds, how, you know, what's important here, what's real. You know, I've done it before. I don't care if I have to give up vehicles. I don't care if I have to give up electricity. You know, if it's going to be maintained in a good quality earth for my great grandkids, you know, I'm all for it. But I know I'm just one man. So in the meantime, I keep hoping that they're going to find other alternatives that can get them out of that, you know, start turning things around. Otherwise, it's not humans that are going to destroy the earth. It's just the earth will remove their ability to live on it. Watch, because she's going to have to clean herself. She has that ability. That's why I like watching those Discovery channels too. It makes everything a lot clearer sometimes. You know, one thing I like watching, you know, when I talk about that sacredness, that sense of sacred, you know. I remember watching this show one time and it just hit me like a bolt of light. And it was all about these little beetles in Africa. And they talked about how all those big animals over there on that savanna, there's water, buffaloes and wildebeests and giraffes and rhinopotamuses and elephants, and, you know, that they produce enough waste that would leave about 4 feet of feces a day across that savanna. I said, wow, a couple of days and pretty, you know, how much is that stuff is going to be piled up. And then they talked about there's these little dung beetles. They crawl around and they find that stuff and they roll it up in a ball and they bury it and now they eggs in it. So egg hatches and they eat that stuff up and they crawl out and go and they roll up more and bury it. Lay eggs in it. It hatches, more crawl up, eat it up and go bury more of it. And I saw all of that and all of a sudden I just went, oh wow. The Creator really thought of everything. You know, just imagine if it wasn't for those little bugs, what would be across that savanna, you know? And the Creator even thought about who's going to clean up after him. You know, so it just really hit me that sense of the sacred, how, you know, how connected everything is and how the Creator really made everything work like that. And here we are thinking we can improve on that. But that's that sense of the secret, you know. Maybe help you understand these things a little bit, you know. What these things can be used for, how they're intended, you know. And I find that those kinds of knowledges and concepts, they're all over, you know. Some people might have heard there was a man I spent a lot of time with, Art Solomon, you know. And one of the things that Art Solomon told me when I was a kid, he said, never refuse knowledge. So I always remember that. listen to people. It doesn't matter if I'm talking to Lakota or Hopi or Ojibwe or Anishinaabe. Always listen and never refuse knowledge. You know, if people are willing to share knowledge, then I'll take that, I'll accept that. You know, because somewhere down the road it's going to come into play. It's going to help because it's all basic. It's all the same. Just that we came from different parts of the country, but somewhere we all met sometime. You know, even in the Longhouse, they have stories about when winter went to war against summer. The Anishinaabe, I talked about the Anishinaabe ones yesterday. Well, the Longhouse has those same stories. You know, and how the peoples had to flee. So how many times did that happen, and how far down? You know. Because we have, in the Longhouse, the migration story talks about coming from around Oklahoma area, east and then north where we are. And I remember I was down in the desert country. We had the International Indian Treaty Council conference one year in Papago or Pima territory, Otham territory. So we organized a support run from Los Angeles that went down through different Indian communities and Chicano communities and then across the southern desert to the bringing word of that conference, you know, and also as a support and solidarity run. Because when you do things like that, that run is your prayer. That's why those sacred runs, running used to be a prayer. We did that in that way. So we did that. Went down into that deep desert spot. This far from the Mexican border. I was down there and met some of those elders, old Pima people, Otams. And they came out because they want to know who people are in their territory. So they found out who I was. Were talking with me, and one of the things they said is they said, "We remember when your people came up from Mexico." So how far have we been moving across these Turtle Islands for how many, millennia? And yet, there's no old sites up around the Bering Strait. It seems the older south you go, the older the sites get. But the scientists don't understand that. They say, no, they came across Bering Strait, That's why there's no sites there. I guess they're all down south, right? If people are interested in that kind of subject, there's a good book in the library there, Bones, that I've read. A really good book, talks about all that, how they've been finding, and the pictures, they kind of look like a Sundance that they've been finding. But they're finding these old cave paintings in Brazil and other parts of South America that are older than the cave paintings they found in France. And then there's sites even older than that, the further south that they go. So what's our origin? Was it across that Bering Strait, or, did we originate in a refrigerator or an incubator? So there's lots of knowledges that tie us together, There's lots of knowledges that have to be uncovered. There's still a lot that's missing, I come from a time, I remember when we started standing up, our peoples were still scared, People would go and they would hide in the bush to hold a sweat or a ceremony under fear of arrest. And people forget those times, Instead, they're coming and they're trying to grab these things and latch onto these things. Even non-native peoples want these things from us now. They forget that at one time how illegal they were, that they were, we were not allowed to practice them. You get arrested, thrown in jail, beaten. One man I met from Akwesasne, we talked a long time, Mose David, and this was not too long before he died. Mose David was, I can't remember his title, and he was one of the Wolf Clan Longhouse chiefs. But he was in an old age home, so Jake Swamp was the man that sat in for him, what held his title. And that's what he talked about, He said, at one time we would get together, me and my friend, we would go and we would hold the ceremonies, we would burn the tobacco, we would do the dances, we would sing the songs. The police would come and arrest us and throw us in jail. He said, so then we'd get out of jail, and we'd go back when it was time, and we'd burn the tobacco, we'd sing the songs, we'd do the dances. would get arrested, get thrown in jail. And he was talking about a time way back, there was only 2 of them on Akwesasne that would do that. You know, and we said, well, that must have been hard. He said, yeah. He said, well, we had to do that. He said, well, because one of these days we knew that every people would come looking for it. You know? But that's the kind of times that we were under right up until the 60s. You know, and people forget that. You know, now they think that it's here for the taking, that it's, you know, and they're surprised sometimes why maybe we're a little bit protective of it, you know. But it's again, it's a natural reaction to what we're coming on. You know, but just to understand that, you know, how sacred these things are and why they should be treated respectfully, because they've been a hard time coming, they've been a hard time keeping. You know, my dad and Art Solomon, Fred Wheatley, there's stories of those 3 men standing in the rain outside of prisons waiting to go in just to talk to the brotherhood, to the people in the prisons. You know, just so they could go in and burn sweetgrass for them, burn a little tobacco for them, talk with them and tell jokes with them and make them feel it. People would ask, well, why are you doing that? Well, they're our kids too. You know, and again, you see that compassion that opens up for our peoples when we start embracing these things. You know, that's why to me it's a good thing, it's a good way. I really like being Indian, you know? Even though public school tried to beat that out of me, right? You know, but it was hard. First thing I had to do was learn how to like myself, right? So I say those things just to help encourage people, you know, about the whole assimilation and the language, right? You know, 3/4 of the world's vegetables came from native people. Every kind of bean in the world came from our peoples except horse bean and soybean. Longhouse people up this way, we grew over 17 varieties of bean, the Uwehongli people alone. All the different varieties of corn that we grew. So it wasn't just corn, beans, and squash. It was 75% of the vegetables, the food crops, including things like tapioca and pineapple, chocolate, peanuts, chewing gum, popcorn, came from native peoples. Other things, other agricultural products like rubber, maple sugar, cotton. The cotton that we use now that came from Indian peoples in the South. Just read the journals of some of those old Spanish explorers that arrived. The cotton they found was so fine they thought it was silk. The only cotton they had over there was a shorter, coarse fibered cotton. The cotton we use now came from Indian peoples over here. Only now they call it South Sea cotton or India cotton. You know, just like they talk about India rubber. They never like to give us credit for nothing. But I look at that, you know, all those foodstuffs that they have came from our peoples. They're eating our food. You know, a lot of times they're even eating our cooking. Where would the culinary arts of the world be without tomatoes and chilies? Both members of the deadly nightshade family, both things that were domesticated by Indian peoples. They had no concept of what they were until they came here, and yet they're a major part of the world's culinary arts now. From Thailand to Mexico to Italy, you know. You find tomatoes and chilies and almost everything everywhere. And they came from our peoples. Over 300 medicines listed in the pharmacopoeia came from native peoples, including cough syrups, analgesics, acid, digitalis, Vaseline, petroleum jelly. All came from native peoples. And then we know about the guns. The American government finally recognized in the late 80s the contributions that they took from our peoples in forming the American Constitution and government, and how those concepts spread from there to the French Revolution. And then the English had to pick it up because their peoples were going to start rebelling. You know? So those things that spread like that. And then another form of government from Marx and Engels, who started reading The League of the Iroquois by Lewis Henry Morgan, and other works on Indian cultures and societies by Rousseau and Thomas Paine, the Quaker, and different intellectual writers around that time, and started writing their concepts on what's called socialism and communism. You know, you think about that. The roots of the two greatest governmental powers in the world came from our people. And yet they're telling us to assimilate. You know? So we have to start looking at that and remembering who we are, you know, because we had some good things like that. We had good social order. We had respect amongst our peoples. We had better than gender equality, you know. There was a working relationship, you know. We knew our places. We knew what was going on. One thing I like in the longhouse, there's no real word for man or woman. When you understand the breakdown, the word for woman means the one who keeps the path. The word for men is to rotiskagate, the one who carries the burden. And I looked at that, and that's not describing a gender, that's describing a responsibility in the community. You see? And so they think we didn't have any responsibilities. No, we didn't have any jobs, but everybody had responsibilities. See? Everybody had their instructions, but those instructions came from the Creator. They weren't man-made laws. If we followed the instructions of the Creator, there would be no homeless. The Creator gave everything the right to a den, a burrow, a nest. And why are there so many homeless in the streets? That's not the Creator's fault. That's a result of man laws. You see? So we have to find that natural way back. You know, what's the natural law? What's our instructions? How are we supposed to care for one another? There shouldn't be any homeless in the street. There shouldn't be any hungry people anywhere, you know. And yet we're in that position where that happens. If all we did was make sure everybody in the world had enough to eat, over half the world's problems would disappear overnight. If everybody was able to go to bed at night with a full belly and not worry about their kids being hungry the next day. Just think how much easier people would feel and be able to relax and start, you know. And yet there's people starving in the world. Well, North America is paying farmers not to grow food. Concepts it's hard for me to wrap my head around. Here we are in North America with less than 6% of the world's population, but we're utilizing over 65% of the world's resources. No wonder the rest of the world is starving. No, why can't we just make sure the world has enough to eat? You know, our people's tried to do that. We're always willing to share food. I remember talking to some Choctaw elders. A lot of people don't know that during the potato famine in Ireland, that there were different Indian nations, like the Choctaws, sent them bushels of corn. They heard about that potato famine, and they were sending food over there. You know? Now what if everybody just followed that example, and we made sure everybody in the world had enough to eat? That's all it would take. But still wait for the humanness to come back, you know. And these are the things that I hope bring that back, because they remind us, like I said, you just remember that Thanksgiving, remember what the responsibility to the creation is, and everything else starts getting clearer every day. Because that's all I have to do, I just do my Thanksgiving, you know, every sunrise. Just simple, just basic, you know, pray for the people. I never prayed for myself. The elder told me one time, you want to know the secret to having your prayers answered? I said, yeah, don't pray for yourself. So that's, you know, never do. I always pray for the people. You know, all I've asked is to just ask the spirits, you know, take anything bad, put it where it won't harm anything. I never ask them to send it back where it came from. Just keep it going around and around and around. You know, some of the things I learned about the medicine in that way. There was one time in Northwest. I think Madbeer Anderson was there, another longhouse person, a couple of people from pipe Sundance leaders from the Dakotas were there, all talking to us at the same time. And we were just young guys, we were in our 20s back then, and they're talking to us about, you know, the power of these medicines, you know, the power of working with the creation and everything. You know, we're listening to all this, and we're just young guys, we're just learning, and plus we want to be doing stuff. And one of the questions was, well, we have this power, why can't we use this to win? Those medicine people, they said, well, we could. So then right away we didn't understand, you know how they explained it. You know, Philip Deere, he said, you use your medicine that way, it's going to hurt somebody. You know, you have to understand, you put that medicine out there, it'll come back that same way. He said, well, we have you young people. The young people go out there, you do the work that you have to do. And we can use our medicine to protect and to heal you. And the medicine will come back protecting and healing. But we can't use it to defeat, we can't use it to hurt, we can't, you know, because it comes back to, you know, that's why I never asked, you know, for something to be sent back. It's because we're it's like, and I heard an expression, I can't remember how to say it in Mohawk, but these old clan mothers, they said one time, they translated, it meant, be careful what you kick, you never know what'll bite you in the heel. Thought about it, means that what goes around comes around, with that same concept. You know, so we have that, we understand that, we know that, you know. That's why we do these things like that. Always say things in a good way, we always preach it in a good way. Because it comes back that way. You know, I had to learn that from you. I was a mean guy. You wouldn't want to know me when I was 16, 17, you know. Sticking needles in my arm, and I wouldn't think twice about robbing you. You know, but that wasn't me then. You know, that was a creation that didn't like itself. And this is what I had to work through. I had to learn how to like myself again. That's why I was robbing people. I didn't like anybody. How could I like anybody? I didn't even like myself. You know? Pushed through that, and then a whole other world of compassion started opening up. A whole other world of how to do things and accomplishments started opening up once I pushed through it. You know? So that's how these things help me in that way. They work with me in that. So I'll slow down. You know, I see some of the same faces. If people want to say something, you know, this is your time. That's long enough. Or if anybody even wants to just ask a question.
Wondering what your understanding is when we talk about the Haudenosaunee and specifically the Ganyaga-Haga. You seem to know a lot about the historical context. Something that's puzzled me is we talk about the tree of peace, we talk about the peacemaker, we talk about all of that. And then when you read some of the history books, we also talk about adopting on one end and kind of slavery, it's called, on other ends. And I'm wondering what your understanding of that and how that fits in.
Well, I don't know about any slavery.
Yeah, okay. That's what I hear, but you read some of the books, you write, well, who's writing these books?
What are the books written, and what was the time period?
Because I remember asking Ernie Benedict about, you know, the Hurons and Brebeuf and what was the Ganyaga-Haga role in all of that, and he said, well, it was Hurons that had been adopted and that went back and sought revenge, and then, so who writes the history, I guess, is the question, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Because I don't know about any slavery, but I know about adoption and how that works. You know, because a lot of people were adopted. And you'll find that sometimes as on Six Nations, one of the last names of family, there's a family last name of Nanticoke. And you find names like that. The Nanticoke were a Lenape people. And they were adopted into the Confederacy to protect them. And so when that adoption works, you're told when you're adopted, this is who you are, this is your name, this is your clan.
This is your nation. Everything else is gone. You know, and there's a reason for that. If you bring that with you, it'll start creating those divisions. You see, if you're going to be adopted, you're adopted. It's a full adoption. Everything else is gone. You see, and it has to be that way because, you know, this is who you are. I know I got brothers that get mad at me from the log house all the time. Because I will mention that while I'm Mohawk and Anishinaabe, they'll turn around. You were reinstated, you're Mohawk. And they're really adamant on me about that, you know. And, you know, well, I know, but, you know, even I still acknowledge, you know, I can't get away from that for me, but I understand their insistence too, you know, because and it's also in the law. It's in the great law about that. But as for slavery, no, I don't understand that.
Yeah, that's why I asked.
I know that sometimes, like during warfare, adoption was how you ended warfare. Because if there's adoptions, how do you go to war against family? You see, so adoption was also used as a means of ending conflicts, right? Because you can't go to war against family, you know. But as for slavery, no. You know, or maybe here's something that happens, and then okay, well, you have a choice, right? Young men from another nation would be adopted, and the reason for that was to replace the young men that had been lost, and that would be explained, right? And if the people had a choice, though, they didn't have to be adopted, but then the other choice was the continued war until the peace was brought about. And the easiest way for that peace was adoption. And I can see how from European perspectives they start viewing that stuff as imposing and, you know, oh well, they're slaves, they have to do this now, and, you know. And
Yeah,
so
that makes sense.
to me, that comes from their perceptions. They're trying to put it on, because there was a whole period that's talked about when the Europeans first arrived. There was a great peace. From Lake of the Woods to the Tennessee River, the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi. The whole one soup bowl concept, you know, and that had been over a couple of hundred or a couple of thousand years from the Great Law of Peace to developing that, you know. That's why they found there was a Lenni-Lenape Confederacy, there was a Powhatan Confederacy, there was a Narragansett, you know, because everybody was using that model from the Iroquois in terms of uniting their separate people, and everybody else was also brought into that one soup bowl concept, right? And that started breaking up when the Europeans came over. You know, so you got to imagine on the East Coast, maybe down there with the Powhatans, here's the English pilgrims saying, well, we want to buy and own all of this land over here. But there was the one soup bowl concept. And that didn't fit into it, right? And everything went back to the Tree of Peace, because that was the roots that went out to the four directions, and that was the origin of where that great peace managed to spread from. So it wasn't that the Iroquois were lost, but that was where the councils would all come to start. And so of course they would say, well, we have to take this to Iroquois territory. So the Europeans would write, oh, well, the Iroquois are the empire builders, they're the despots, they're the, you know. And you look at that early history like that, they paint our peoples as the bad guys all the time, you know. And so analyzing that, that's what we've come to realize. It's their perspective based on what they were seeing, because they couldn't do what they wanted. You know, so they say, well, if the Iroquois have to be consulted, they must be the dictators, you know. They must be the slave masters, they must be, you know. But I've heard different kinds of stories. How I heard one story of a bunch of people chasing somebody up into Mohawk country and trying to capture him and bring him back. It was a black guy. And he had come and he had been adopted into a clan. And
And when the slave hunters came to get him, they said, well, what are you doing? They said, well, we own him. They didn't understand that concept. What do you mean you own him? He's a human being. How can you own a human being? They didn't understand the concept. Where down south, you had what they called the 5 civilized tribes. And some of those, like the Cherokee, they would go to the markets and they would buy slaves. That's why they're being called the 5 Civ, because they thought, well, they're the ones that are adapting to. Well, what was going on was they would get those slaves, they would bring them home, and then they'd make them part of the family. Again, because they didn't understand that concept. But they understood the concept of adding to your nation's workforce in numbers, but not the concept of slavery. And that's how they saw it. So they brought them home and they became part of the family. They were adopted. That's why you find there's communities down there of black Cherokees. You find communities of black Seminole. I had a friend, Sammy, wasn't very big, and to look at him, you'd think he was right from the rainforest of Africa. But he started talking, he spoke fluent Seminole. And you find little communities like that down there, you know. So as far as slavery, I don't get it. I don't know if that answers your
No,
question.
it's very helpful, the different, looking at adoption through a different lens.
Yeah, and another thing, they always write about the Iroquois and the Huron. Like the Huron were also an Iroquois people. They had the same language as the Mohawk. They had the same dances, the same songs. Just they didn't come into the Confederacy at that point, but they were adopted at a certain point. You know, I heard stories about when they went after Brebeuf and the reasons for that. You know, there was a lot of sexual abuse going on against our women and our kids from these areas. And so our peoples went and they find that that's why they burnt those Jesuits. They didn't burn them because that was our culture. They burnt them because of the things that they found they were doing with the kids and the young girls. That's our stories about that stuff. And why they burnt them. You know, they said, you have committed a crime against our peoples. You've committed a crime and a sin against your own laws. And your own laws says that the punishment is torture and death by fire. That's why they burnt them. It was in their laws, you know, and that's why they did that to them. Because of those abuses. But those are longhouse stories that don't get talked or told, you know, and the only ones that, you know, because the first time they did that, they let Brebeuf go. And I think that was the time up around Huronia. And they told Brebeuf to go back and to tell everybody what had happened and to never do that again. And that was the time when they had asked the Hurons to help because there were 3 columns of Iroquois warriors converging on that area. And there's certain places you see pictographs that show 3 snakes moving. But the direction they show those snakes were towards that Huronia. And that represented the 3 columns of warriors that were moving up there because they used to call us rattlesnakes. You know, I go up to Wikwemicong on Manitoula and they still call me Nottoway. You know, that means like rattlesnakes. But they called us that because of the 3 warnings. See? They say, well, they warn you before they strike. You know, because in the Great Law it says you give 3 warnings to try and, you know, and you try and make peace 3 times. So I say, well, they warn you before they strike. And that's why they show 3 columns of snakes moving up there. And after they took that, and you know, the women that they had gone up there to rescue were killed by the French before they got there, which is why they destroyed the place. And they told Father Brebeuf to, you know, take this message back and make sure it doesn't happen to our people again, but he didn't do that. Instead he went back and said, oh, they were just picking on us, and those Iroquois are mean, and they picked on us, and we're doing nothing, and they were just picking on us. So again, we're the bad guys in the history. You know, but those are our stories as to why we did those things. And so I read about, you know, all the Jesuit martyrs. Well, a martyr gets killed because he won't renounce his faith. So what does that mean? Their faith was child and sexual abuse and pimping. You know, because that's why they were killed. It looks like they still won't renounce it. But again, I don't know, that's,
Yeah.
I went off a bit on the subject.
Should probably wrap